When athletes pray before the game for a win, and they do it in both locker rooms, which team does God favor? We'll be talking about that with Matt Mosley, sports journalist, on Good God. Stay tuned. Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith in public life. I'm George Mason, the host, and I'm pleased to welcome Matt Mosley. Matt, glad to have you with us. Matt is a sports journalist and a podcast provocateur and a sports personality in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and also a good friend and churchmate. So, Matt, we're really glad that you've been willing to join us here, and I think it for a lot of people who listen to you on the Doomsday podcast, your podcast with Ed Werder and dealing with Dallas Cowboys conversations and whatnot. You're more of a voice than a figure. Occasionally, people see you on the news, on the sports, but for the most part, they hear you. And so this is a gift to people to see this beautiful face. And this.
I don't know if it's a gift. I'm reminded why radio and podcasting and the audio is more my thing as beads of sweat start to form on my forehead. But I will say your podcasting career has started off a lot better than mine. Your digs down here, your beautiful studio. We don't exactly have that sort of backdrop, but it's okay. We're slowly but surely growing.
Well, I think a lot of us who listen to you, though, wouldn't say that. We would appreciate all the things you and Ed do and how you inform us about all of that. But before we get into
by the way, can we keep Ed off Twitter?
That would be helpful. Actually, there's a lot of people we'd like to keep off Twitter, aren't there? But that's a pretty great medium for you. You seem to know how to do that in a way that keeps humor and doesn't polarize people too much. So good job on that.
The people at the end of the sharp stick, I don't know if they agree that I'm that kind with it, but it is an interesting medium, and it's like it's one of those things that isn't it that we sort of get to the point where we feel like we need it to sort of keep up with news. You certainly need it in sports. And then sometimes you're just like, wait, is this an evil tool? Is this a helpful? And I think it can be a little bit of both, like a lot of things.
Like a lot of things, maybe even preaching in a Baptist church, right? Something like that. Well, Matt, you grew up in Kaufman, Texas, and we hear about that quite often. You seem to be proud of having grown up in Kaufman, and I know that you're a Baptist by background, went to Baylor University, and you're still a Baptist, although some would question that because you go to Wilshire Baptist Church.
That's right.
But tell us about your faith experience growing up.
Well, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, Kaufman, Texas. I am proud of where I'm from. And it was an amazing experience, and I was one of those kids that every time the doors were open, we were up there. My mom taught the music makers choir. That would be like 4th through 6th grade. My dad was a deacon, so it was all I knew. And much like what we have in our church and the youth with Darren DeMint over the years are very close to him and have that point of reference. My youth directors had a profound impact on my life, and a guy named Darrell Anderson. He left when I was a sophomore, and the kind of impact those sorts of people have on you. I thought my life was over. Like it was like, well, this is, how do I recover from this? Right. And I still recall the next guy who followed him wasn't quite the athlete. Mm-hmm. And boy, you've come up and you've been a youth director in your past, and you've been around youth directors. You were an athletic guy, I'm told. But, that was how we measured guys. And this guy was an unbelievable athlete, and he was a great basketball player. Mm-hmm. And the next guy showed up, and he had bright yellow pants on. Yeah. And I can remember my buddies, we were going on a mission trip, and we're like, let's see if he can catch a football. and he couldn't.
Wow.
We ended up liking the guy a lot, but it was just an interesting. Yeah.
But it actually does raise a point about the connection, especially in Texas, I think, between sports and religion. It's a really powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think you brought it up in a recent sermon, talking about almost, do we sometimes pray, okay, we're going to pray to win. I was out recently, and I had a great time. I heard Clayton Kershaw at a Dallas Baptist banquet, and I was amazed at sort of the, they were very upfront with their Christianity, which is great, but it was that, hey, we're not going to apologize for praying for wins. We are, and it's just fascinating, our approach in religious life to, if we... Sometimes there is that belief, well, we think we're on the right side, so we're praying on the right side. And
there are people actually on the other team praying that way too. So how do we sort through, how does God sort through whom to favor in these prayers?
It's difficult.
Yeah, and, I'm not sure we think about that often enough. So when I was growing up and in sports, I was guilty of the same thing. And I say guilty, look, I think it was the best I knew how to do at that stage of my spiritual understanding, right? Trying to be faithful, trying to say everything about my life, including my performance, my sport, should be subject to my faith. And so I would pray, but not always knowing exactly the implications of those prayers or how to pray. And I thought of it as an act of faithfulness and witness. But over time, you do sort of say, all right, if that's true, then what about the other guy? And what does God really care about winning that much?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, it was easier in District 13-4A when I was a senior playing basketball because we literally didn't have a prayer. So we won the last game of my career, my illustrious high school basketball career, which I was mainly used to commit a lot of fouls. I was a so-called stopper, but only just to antagonize.
You were the hack-a-shack guy.
Yeah. I'd get in there, and I did take my lumps, and I had people come after me and that kind of thing. But we were 0-13, and we won our last game against Midlothian. Okay. We took down Midlothian, Kaufman did, and that was
just David and Goliath right there.
That was a huge moment. It basically, I wish you had to use that in your sermon.
So God was on your side.
Yeah, certainly.
Did you pray a lot before that one?
We did. Yeah. We did. I mean, I do remember in that particular game trying to, by that time, it was like, let's work on some trick shots. And I think I was trying to perfect, late in my high school career, a little bit of a hook shot. And I brought that out against Midlothian. I don't remember.
That's the stuff of legends still in Kaufman.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
The Mosley hook.
They still talk about it.
Yeah, okay. So we'll get back to your growing up and all of that, but you've broached a subject.
Back to my basketball career.
Yeah, well, right, exactly. But let's keep going, because as a sports journalist, a guy who has been in the locker rooms now of both, well, from high school to college to professional people, you do hear an awful lot of religious language still going on. And how do you sort through how to honor that, how to relate to players in this way? Because you yourself are a person of faith, but this is more complicated because sometimes they want that to be reported in ways that then allow them to feel that they've made a witness. Right?
Correct. And I think, as a journalist, you're there to get the story. And now if you're doing a feature story in their Christianity, I had to learn and go through a lot early in my career about that. I mean, do I let someone basically almost write some sort of Christian literature or something? I mean, if I reported everything they said, it is like a witness. And I think early in my career, I kind of thought, well, this is kind of cool because this has been my background. And then you become older and more cynical, and you hear too many.
Cynical? That? Cynical?
You hear too many stories of, because of the domestic violence, I wasn't close to God, or this or that, or the crimes or whatever. And you honestly, it's kind of like getting to know too much about food. You get to know too much about these people, and then you're just kind of like, okay, really? And so, as a journalist, probably later on when I was covering the Cowboys and then covering the NFL for ESPN.com, I was less you just sort of, I wasn't rude about it. It's just when we kind of went that direction, almost kind of put the pen down. Like, okay, we're gonna kind of do this now. And I was always a little bit like, really? Like I grew up, what was the big Baptist, Baptist Standard and the Baptist, all these things that would come to the house and all. And I'd be at the Super Bowl, and I remember seeing someone with a Baptist Standard and I'd be like, what are they doing? What are they up to? And it was, they had been sent from their different publications to cover the Super Bowl in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. And you have to watch it in any way of life, because we sort of think, okay, I'm with ESPN, this is the way you're supposed to cover it. Yes. What are they doing? Why are they trying to kind of, force this religious angle or whatever? So yeah, I would say I evolved on that issue, and I'm not certain I evolved in the right direction on it.
Well, I don't know. I think it's difficult to do, and having been in locker rooms and played college football and remembering how I tried to navigate that when I was young, there was, I have to say, something of a kind of religious superstition about it. Yes, I was trying to be faithful, but I think I and a lot of my friends, we would feel like if we did certain things that were pleasing to God, then we would maybe cross a threshold in our relationship with God where the return would be God favoring us as well. And I don't think that we thought through that very carefully, but that is often what happens when somebody sticks a microphone in your face after scoring a touchdown or winning a big game, and the first thing is, I just want to thank God, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, that sort of thing. On the one hand, a Christian would say, well, what a beautiful thing, they've used this occasion to speak about their faith. On the other hand, it's really sort of crossing genres here. It's kind of co-opting a sporting event for a religious witness.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's and I think sometimes we make judgments basically like, wait, that player seems to sort of live it, so maybe he's more allowed to say that than some others who you feel like. I mean, I'm very good friends with the guy who played at the school where you played, and I'm talking about Michael Irvin, because we used to work at the same radio station. I love Michael. I mean, he's just the greatest guy, and he lives his life. I mean, he's just out there, and you never know with Michael what's going to come up, and he's just had all sorts of issues going back to his playing days. And it's funny, we talk about how we look at two different people. He seems authentic to me and genuine in trying to live this certain life. Right. He's very upfront with it. Now, sometimes I would say this to Michael, I'd be like, are you really the best person to be sharing this message right now? I mean, we know, and again, a lot of his stuff's public. Whereas Dion, who is his good friend, I've just had this real antagonistic feeling toward, and maybe, my longtime co-host, Randy Galloway, he'd been tough on Dion, and maybe he influenced me to a certain extent, but his whole school and everything he's done, it just seems...
Prime Academy, yeah.
Yeah, they're just, to me, that there has been sort of a fraudulent bent to that direction. So I don't know, but I mean, who am I to go, because both of those guys are very upfront with their spirituality, they go on these shows, they talk about it. Is it fair of me to go, I think that guy's really genuine, this guy's not? Probably not, but it just does.
Well, but at least it does. If you put your faith out there in such a public way, it invites scrutiny, doesn't it? I mean, it invites people to ask those questions to see whether there is a correspondence between what you say and how you live. Yeah. So it is dangerous in one sense, but it's also an opportunity to live into that faith as well. And I think with Michael, and I only know Michael a little bit and don't know Dion, but my sense is that there is a kind of preemptive sense about going out and speaking about your faith, in the sense of saying, now that I've said this, it helps me to hold me accountable because I've said it too. I've been bold about it. And so I think Michael has clearly tried to live into that more so as he's gotten older and wrestle with that.
Yeah. I sense that, like, when I was on the radio a lot, people were dying. I never really knew this until I would get out and talk to folks, that they were they were so interested in, and you can't just fill this void and go, okay, well, I'm going to be the so-called Christian radio guy. All you can do is be natural. And some of the things, and there might be something that happened at Wilshire, or I always joked that I thought I was the only one who could bring the fundamentalists and the moderates together because I had friends, on both sides and everything. But I always was struck by even just tiny mentions, where these little inside things where I might mention an old Christian, contemporary music. Maybe I said Larnell Harris or, Sandy Patty, something like 1% of my audience sort of got. But boy, those people who got it.
Right.
And it was almost like, and they would come up and they would say, I so appreciate your witness or your, and I would think to myself, man, I don't feel like I talk about my faith at all. But it is, I think people are out there just like, is there someone,
exactly like
represents,
me who represents? Well, when we come back from the break, I want to pursue this sense of the connection between your Christian faith and vocation and what you're doing. So let's take a break and we'll be back.
The YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas welcomes neighbors each day to make sure everyone, regardless of age, income, or background, has the opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. The YMCA's annual campaign enables the Y to provide free or discounted memberships and programs to the people who need them the most, making our communities safer, stronger, and healthier. The Y has always been a place of possibility and a promise for all.
We're back with Matt Mosley, and Matt, we were talking about this relationship between sports and faith, and this is something that I think is worth pursuing, and it connects back to your upbringing and to the direction your own life chose. So you come up as a Baptist and you end up going to a Baptist college, Baylor University, which we hear about incessantly over and over again in all of your things, the great Baylor. And surely that had an impact in all of this as well. You first think, though, that you may be called to law, and you go to law school. And then that turns out not to be the right direction for you.
And so they have a way of letting you know.
Sorting it out.
Yeah.
So tell us about this sense of your spiritual perception of how the connection between your faith and your vocation developed.
Well, no, it's interesting. The whole law school thing was my dad was a lawyer. I had an uncle that was a lawyer, and that just... you sometimes, I think you had a calling, a special calling, and my calling was just like, what happened? I didn't mean to get out of college on time. And so it's like, and I got out and got a job, and it was just like, this is not fun. Like, I'm not ready for this. And so it really seemed like, okay, there are a lot of co-eds that are back at the Baylor campus. I'm about 6 months removed. I need to get back. I need to get back on campus. And in retrospect, law school is probably not the best choice for sort of, I don't know what would be.
Not much of a social life in law school.
Yeah, and I don't know,
especially the first
would
year.
Seminary have been better? I don't know. I think
Probably.
the Truett kids studied as well. I don't remember them. Anyway, I lived with one of them, in fact, when I was in law school. But I went back to law school, and there were some parts I loved about it, and part of it was the being in the courtroom and like the mock trial, and that was the stuff. But then I got out and did a clerkship and realized that they're like, it'll be about 10 years before you see a courtroom.
Right.
And I didn't really want to be in the DA's office. I thought about that and everything. And so I got and I was making some B's, a few C's. I was kind of hanging in there, but it just wasn't.
Wasn't in you.
No.
Right.
No, and I really kind of thought, and maybe I was wrong, maybe finishing the degree would have been wonderful, and I could have done something else, and I still could have been a sports writer and all, but I felt at that moment, if I finished, I had to practice.
Yeah.
I just felt like, okay, and I would have become a lawyer and ended up like your brother, Wayne, and it would just have been awful. No, I just had a sense, so I got about 3/4 in at Baylor and pulled the ripcord. So my wife, Meredith, who you've known since she was a little girl or high school, whatever,
right.
When you came to Wilshire, you talk about the rope-a-dope. she thought she was marrying a lawyer, and then it's just like, no, we're going to try this. I mean, we got engaged, and I think I was in law school.
Right,
and it's
right.
like, no, I'm going to try this high school, sports writer thing. And
Yeah,
work
so
my
when
way
you
up.
start out with the Dallas Morning News, you're covering high school girls basketball in the state of Texas and volleyball and stuff like
if that,
right?
yeah, or ice dancing,
Right.
yeah, whatever. And I remember I was very fortunate. The girls basketball team that I was a part of, or that I was covering as a beat, and of course I went in there like a house of fire. And I thought it was my job to uncover everything. And so I was on the Mansfield Lady Tigers, 3 straight 5A state titles.
Right.
Samantha Morrow, she became a college coach and remarkable lady. But I would like, if the fans were rude at a tournament, I felt like I needed to write about that. I was like really already trying to, uncover every scoop. And boy, she called the Arlington Morning News, which is where I was, and she said, "This is not how we're used to being covered." They're like, "Well, we don't have much control
What did Dave
over
Smith
this guy."
say about all of that? Yeah.
Dave was the, and Dave, he was the executive editor of the Morning News. I went to the Morning News, and so I don't know how much of this has to do with faith, but I'll just tell you this: in 2003, I was covering high schools, and I was covering like Plano high schools, and they called me and said there's a missing 6'10" player at Baylor. There's this guy, and they can't find him.
Oh, I know where this is going.
And that was 2003. And I was sent down to Waco because, hey, you still know people down there. I graduated in 95, so I'm like 26, 27 years old, or maybe 28. And so I head down there and just start kind of looking around, and I was in these marijuana-filled, I know that people don't think that happens at Baylor, but apartments, and I was on the trail of trying to find, I was like 2 days behind where this 6'10" player, Patrick Dennehy, had been. Mm-hmm. And so next thing you know, it was another young guy named Matt Stiles. They brought him down for the first 4 or 5 days of this missing. And so I go from covering high schools to being on every night with Anderson Cooper on CNN and good, I remember saying to Good Morning America, I got to work. I don't have time to come on. And I thought, how strange has this, I didn't have enough clothes. I went down there thinking I was going to be down there a night and just try to cover this thing and get back.
Right.
And this thing stretched. And it was one of those perfect storms where there wasn't a lot of news going on. It was like maybe in middle of June or something, or July. And it became this huge national story.
Right.
But you brought up Dave Smith. Speaking of that, I was in a hotel room. I ran out of juice on like a flip phone. It was early in the days of we barely had the internet and everything. And I ran up because I was doing all these calls and all this investigation on trying to find this player who ended up murdered by a teammate. And I ran up like a $2,000 hotel phone bill. And I thought, Dave Smith, I thought that was the end of my career right there.
Right.
And Dave, just as he could, he said, "You did a good job. Don't worry about that."
Wow.
And
Nice.
Yeah. And then they said, when I came back from that, I was on the Cowboys beat.
Wow.
So that was a
remarkable
tragic
jump.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Right. So sometimes the things you think are the likely ladders to success aren't that, and what you find is you end up through no scheming of your own falling into something that is tragic and awful, and it actually becomes the place where you launch from.
Yeah, and I think in trying to even thinking about faith back then, my whole thought was, I've got to become, 1 week, this is how Dave Smith was, and not to get too much on Dave Smith's stories, but in 1 week, one time he called me and he said, "Can you move to Austin to cover Texas?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can do that, cover the Longhorns." He said, "Wait, we've changed our mind. We want you to go cover Bobby Knight at Tech. We want you to move to Lubbock."
Yeah.
And then the third day, he said, "Can you cover the Stars for us?" Mm-hmm. I mean, it was an all over, and it was a time when we still had a lot of money, and they would send us anywhere, and no amount of money was, it was just crazy.
The sports section was king. I mean,
in the morning
always.
news. Sport. So I came at sort of the tail end of that, the last of sort of the glory days of the morning news. And sadly, they still have some great people over there, and I still love reading the sports, but it's about like 4 pages now, and it used to be, So but I prayed back then. I was just like, I've got to get, and it gets back to this: do we pray for God's will, or do we pray for like our own, we have in our mind what exactly we want? And my whole path was, I got to go cover a college and then be on a professional beat. And you're right, somehow I ended up just getting thrown into this crazy story, and I won some awards for it, and they just immediately said, you're on the Cowboys beat.
So I think this is an interesting thing when we talk about vocation and how God works in our lives, in terms of directing us and leading us and our understanding of that. Sometimes I think we want to create some sort of process whereby we can calculate how to factor in God's call and our ambition, and then plot steps to create a career and say, this is God and me, and here we are working on this together. And most of the time that's a disaster. Most of the time it doesn't work that way. It really is this sort of paying attention to what has just happened to you and what's going on in the world and responding to it, and then the pieces sort of come together and you look back on it and you say, well, there it is. There was my vocation, right?
Yeah, and it would be so much easier if you could just die. I mean, the constant question I get, and I'm sure you get it, even though you've been in the church for 30 years, what's next? What's next? What are you doing next? And I remember saying to people sometimes, I had been at ESPN and I had a radio show and I really thought things would go well, but there's this inherent, and maybe I should look at it in a positive way. I think sometimes people hopefully, think highly of me, and they're like, but every question was always phrased with this tinge of like, when are you going to get to the next thing? And I was always like, am I doing this wrong? Because I kind of been enjoying what I'm doing, and I feel like things are going pretty well.
Yes.
And so anyway, I probably could use a little more though I think I'm okay to just sort of let things happen.
Right.
And then lately, because I left the radio station and things have changed, I started this podcast thing, and I had to go raise funding for that. I've had to be a lot more intentional.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
One of my guys said the other day, he said, have you filed the tax returns for so-and-so, on the this and this? And I was like, man, I hope my accountant, I called him. I was like, did we do it? He's like, yeah, we filed an extension on that. But I was just, that's the grown-up stuff that when you work for people, they give you these W-2s or whatever, and you don't know.
And now it's
think about
it's
that.
On you. Yeah. So how does Meredith factor into all of this? Is she happy that
just cleaning up my mess?
Yes,
constantly.
Right.
She's just incredibly supportive. And anytime we've had like some just kind of like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? How are we going to handle this? How are we going to? She's like, we'll just find a way. And so from the very start, and that is so important. You've had that with Kim. To have a partner who literally can kind of roll with the punches. When they marry someone, now I remember at our rehearsal dinner, somebody standing up and telling Meredith, you will never have a boring day in your life. But basically they're also saying a lot of crazy, stuff is going to happen to you.
Right.
And that has been true for her, but she's embraced it. And, it's just for someone like her who is an organizer, stays on top of things, on committees, huge volunteer, we're just so different. And it kind of works, but I think I'm extremely hard to be married to, but we're about to celebrate 20 years, so.
Well, I would say from my experience, Matt, that being able to know and say that you're extremely hard to be married to is one of the keys to a successful marriage. The minute you turn that around and say, well, I think I'm probably pretty good to be married to. I'm sure that doesn't usually compel affection.
But I do cringe at times when, and you've had this happen, I'm sure, because you give all these speeches and people come up to you, oh my gosh, those were amazing words. And somebody's gone up to Kim, he must be so amazing to live with or whatever. And I hear sometimes people say it to Meredith because, for time to time I can, entertain people and make them laugh. And they're like, oh my gosh, is he just like this all the time? And I'm just like, what is she going to say? And
exactly.
She's always like, he's great. I love it. But she would never... Yeah, but it is.
But it's a little
funny.
different at home, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, it always is.
Certainly grounded, even though you have love and affection. It's it's normal life. So.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you for having this conversation with us, and I think it's fun to listen to you and to follow you, and also to see you down there in the pew and know that you're cheering me on at the same time as I'm cheering you on.
I am.
Yeah.
You're an amazing pastor, and I know sometimes wearing sunglasses in church would throw some pastors off, but you seem to roll with it.
That's right. Well, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you
All
bet.
Right. Good.
The YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas welcomes neighbors each day to make sure everyone, regardless of age, income, or background, has the opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. The YMCA's annual campaign enables the Y to provide free or discounted memberships and programs to the people who need them the most, making our community safer, stronger, and healthier. The Y has always been a place of possibility and a promise for all.